So collaborations and partnerships for endangered archives and libraries, case studies from the past, present, and the future. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Anis, and then it'll go to Matt. Thank you all for coming.
Hello, everyone. I just wanted to take 2 minutes, literally, to welcome you and to thank our generous sponsors. So I'll just read the names out very quickly. Eastview, Libricons, Arthur Fournier, Libre Books, Overdrive, Project Muse, Eran Farhang, and Ferdowsi. And Matt, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Anis. And thank you everyone for coming, and thank you especially to our panelists who are joining us from both North America, Europe, and the Middle East, I believe. So thanks everyone for making this happen. I'm not going to take a lot of time. I'm just going to jump in and introduce our speakers very briefly. I'll introduce them before each presentation, and then we'll get started. So our first speaker today is András Riedelmeier. And András is, of course, well known to many here in the MELA community. He is Emeritus Aga Khan Librarian for Islamic Architecture at Harvard University, a post which he held for 35 years from 1985 until his recent retirement. Over the last 30 years, he has also documented and studied the destruction of manuscript libraries and other cultural heritage during the Balkan Wars of the 1990s, and has testified as an expert witness before the UN War Crimes Tribunal in The Hague and at the International Court of Justice. Today, he will be speaking on his experience with a project to resurrect copies of manuscripts that had been destroyed during the Balkan Wars. And so with that, András, I turn it over to you.
Okay, so I'd like to share my screen. Can you enable screen sharing, please? Okay, let me know when I can try.
You should be good.
Okay, let's try it. Yeah, it works. All right. So without further ado, and I think you'll see the show better if you minimize the little pictures of people at right. Okay, so my talk is officially entitled Resurrecting Copies of Burnt Manuscripts, the Bosnian Manuscript Ingathering Project, over a photo of an actual burnt manuscript that I collected in my field work in the Balkans. So the Balkan Wars of the 1990s took place in the former Yugoslavia. It's the purple area on the map, and Bosnia is the heart-shaped country in the middle. You can see it there. I love this map because unlike most maps which cut off the rest of the world by a line drawn through the center of the Mediterranean Sea, here you can see how close Europe is and how integrated Europe is with what we now call the Middle East and North Africa. So Bosnia is definitely part of Europe. It's closer to Rome than Milan is, but it has also been part of the Muslim world for more than 500 years. Here's a page from an Ottoman school atlas. You can see how seamlessly Southeastern Europe fits into the Ottoman Empire of the time and to Islamic culture. Islam arrived in Bosnia in the 1400s, but Bosnia didn't become entirely Muslim. Slightly over half of the population is Muslim today, About another third is Orthodox Christian, called Serbs. And the remainder is Roman Catholics by tradition, called Croats. Throughout that 500-year period, Bosnia has been a scene of cultures and interaction. You can see it in the previous slide here, where the 16th century mosque complex of Sinan Beg Bojanić, a Bosnian Muslim who was governor of Ottoman Bosnia, stands across the market square from the Serb Orthodox Church with its wonder-working icon of the Virgin Mary. People lived together, worked together, traded with each other, and the trading included intellectual interactions. So on the left, you see a remarkable Christian Orthodox Gospel manuscript surrounding the text of the Holy Gospel is a band of illumination, which those of you who know something about manuscripts will recognize as inspired by Islamic manuscript illumination. Now think about what that means. It means that the monk who copied this saw no intrinsic problem in employing this mode of decoration for God's word. It also probably means that he had the collection of Islamic manuscripts which he used as his models. Similarly, at right, you see the pre-war skyline of Mostar, one of the largest cities in Bosnia, where Islamic minarets, Catholic church steeples, and Serbian Orthodox churches all reached to the sky from the same skyline. Bosnia was a highly literate and literary place. As late as 1991, so just before the war, the city of Sarajevo, Bosnia's capital, still had more than 30,000 Islamic manuscripts. Now, for manuscripts, that is a very considerable number. It means that over 500 years of earthquakes, wars, and other fires and other disasters, still 30,000 survived. That's many times the number of Islamic manuscripts held by my former institution, Harvard, and it's a respectable number for anywhere in Europe. These included the Arabic, Persian, Ottoman, Turkish, as well as Al-Harithy, Bosnian and Arabic script, which the locals called Arabica. It reflected both a tradition of learning and book collecting, and also fluency in one or more of the classical Islamic literary languages. At right, you see Bosnia's oldest endowed library, the Madrasa of Gazi Husrev Beg, and below it, one of the manuscripts from it with Waqf marked prominently in the margins. This included not only manuscripts collected from elsewhere in the Islamic world, among them some really remarkable items, like a copy of Ihya Ulumuddin that was copied during Ghazali's lifetime, but also the products of 500 years of intellectual production by Bosnian Muslim writers. So at left, you have an illuminated copy of the Gulistan of Saadi, held by Sarajevo Library. At right, you have a sharh, a commentary on the Gulistan, written by Ahmad Sudi Bosnavi, a 16th century Ottoman Bosnian commentator on the works of Saadi, still well regarded in Iran as well as in Bosnia. They also, in addition to commentaries, produced works of literature, theology, and philosophy and logic. So at left is an original Arabic qasida from the 18th century by a Bosnian author. At the right is a Brill book on treatises on logic by Bosnian Muslim authors writing in Arabic. This long period of coexistence, fraught as it may have been at times, came to a sudden and violent end in the last decade of the 20th century. With the decline of communism and the end of the Cold War, the amount of ready money coming in from both East and West to Yugoslavia, which was a communist one-party state, but not a member of either bloc, suddenly dried up. And people started worrying about the future, and politicians looked to carve out greater pieces of the ever-shrinking financial pie. In 1991, the war broke out, and in 1992, it spread to Bosnia. Bosnia is not a large country, but it's about 5 times the size of Lebanon, about the size of West Virginia. Like both of those places, it is mountainous, physically very beautiful, and it has a rich history. It was also the scene of a brutal war. Sorry, it skipped here. Of a brutal war in which nearly half of its 4 million population were forcibly displaced. About 1 million of them were forced to leave the country, and 100,000 of them were killed. The technical term of art used by the criminals for this was ethnic cleansing, as if dispossessing and expelling people and killing them for the religious and cultural choices of their ancestors were some kind of public health measure. Along with ethnic cleansing went cultural cleansing, the deliberate destruction of cultural heritage. It included over 1,000 mosques destroyed, as well as archives and libraries. At left, you see what remains of the Archive of the Monument Preservation Authority in Mostar. It was destroyed by Serb Yugoslav army soldiers wielding flamethrowers. Those large cabinets tumbled in the center were for the flat files of architectural drawings. At right is what remained of the National Library in Sarajevo, the collection of record for Bosnia's communities, with 1.5 million books destroyed. In the front, what you see is the remains of burnt book stacks. For manuscripts, the biggest loss was the Oriental Institute in Sarajevo, which in May of 1992 was bombarded with incendiary shells. Incendiary shells are a very specialized form of ammunition. They do not have high explosive power, but they cause fires that are extremely difficult to put out. This is the building where the Oriental Institute was housed on the top 2 floors. At right, you see what remained of it after the fire. What you see there are, yes, the remains of over 5,000 manuscripts and their specialized research library of over 20,000 books, as well as over 200,000 archival documents dating back to the Ottoman period. This is where I bring up one of the problems. Okay, Sarajevo came under siege in April of 1992. The attack on the Oriental Institute was in May of 1992. Like all institutions in Europe and in former Yugoslavia, they had an emergency plan, but they couldn't carry it through. Why? First of all, the city was surrounded. There was shelling from the surrounding hills, and everything became very disorganized. But secondly, they applied to the institution that held the lower 2 floors of the building an institution that provided promotional materials for economic cooperation with the developing world, asking them if they could move some of the more valuable collections of the Oriental Institute into the basement for safekeeping. The Institute for Cooperation with the Developing World refused because they answered to a different ministry and they couldn't get a positive answer from the ministry. So the manuscripts remained on the roof and they burned. Out of the 5,263 recorded manuscript codices and the 200,000 documents, barely 30 manuscripts survived. So here you see an example of what manuscripts look like before and after, and what the archival documents look like before and after. So I learned about this already in 1992 through the news media. Communication with Sarajevo was absolutely impossible. The city was surrounded. There were no phone connections. The only way in and out of Sarajevo was on UN relief flights, which occasionally would allow journalists to come in and out of the besieged city. This was also the beginning years of the internet. The first web browser came online just about then. And a couple of colleagues and I had what we thought was the brilliant idea of collecting digital copies of some of the manuscripts that had been destroyed. So we set up a website and then we said, oops, we better hold off. The ethical thing to do is to ask for the permission of the people who owned the manuscripts before we put anything online. So we composed a letter. We found a journalist who was going into Sarajevo on a UN flight wearing a flak jacket and a helmet. And we waited for an answer. We ended up waiting nearly a year before the reply came, an enthusiastic yes. And so we went online. Our website was one of the very first on the newborn internet. And we were very optimistic. So we put up a data collection page. You can see, if you can read any of this, that we set up an elaborate site where people could submit anything, copies of microfilm, copies of photocopies, copies of photographs. This seemed like a great idea. In fact, it did not collect a single manuscript. Meanwhile, Sarajevo continued under siege. This is Sarajevo's version of the World Trade Center, set ablaze not by planes crashing into it, but by Serbian guns from the surrounding hills. I didn't mean to go back. Nevertheless, we managed to collect by the mid-90s over 600 pages taken of manuscripts from the Oriental Institute before the war. Our biggest haul came from the great manuscript expert Eleazar Birnbaum of the University of Toronto, who very recently passed away. He had been in Sarajevo in the 1980s and had brought back a stack of photocopies, which he, after much persuasion, was willing to allow my colleague Amila Buturovic of York University in Toronto to take to the nearest Kinko's to photocopy them. He made sure to tell her never to take the staples out because he wanted to preserve the page order. So this is one of the manuscripts we recovered. In whole and in part, this was maybe a dozen or two manuscripts, but many of them unique, and the originals were by now ashes. In 1998, Amila and I went to a conference in Sarajevo. The war was over in 95. Sarajevo had opened up. Their internet connection was still wonky. So we took along a pile of archival paper photocopies, as well as a scanned CD to the Oriental Institute, which as an institution still survived, even though its collection did not. They were happy to have it, but didn't quite know what to do with it, so they put it in a safe. Meanwhile, another person had joined the project, my dear colleague Kemal Bakaršić, who was the head of the Library Science and Comparative Literature Department at the University of Sarajevo. And he got one of his master's students to set up a website for us. And this was the website. It was part of a larger website called the Open Book, which gathered not only copies of manuscripts that we collected, but also rare publications that were useful for research on Bosnia. And so Luna Kalas, the student who put this together, did a very great job. She put up some of the manuscripts so they could be downloadable, which was not easy because internet connection was still very iffy in Sarajevo. And as some of you might recall, in the 90s, data storage was still an issue. It was expensive, connections were slow. So the mode of retrieval for most of the manuscript we recovered was from CDs. But then another thing we hadn't considered intervened. In the 1995 peace agreement that ended the war in Bosnia, half of the country was left under the rule of the political party, the Serbian Nationalist Political Party, whose members had been responsible for the destruction of the Institute. And the moment the Open Book website went up, it was subjected to nonstop hacking attacks. And eventually the site had to be taken down. If you look here, you can see that it ceased to exist after some time in the early 2000s. So this is something else to consider. So wouldn't it have been easier for us to put it up on a website outside of Bosnia with perhaps more robust firewalls and protection? Well, the problem was that at the time, 1990s, early 2000s, most academic and other learned institutions did not like to host collections of digital material that they did not themselves originate. It was seen as a burden, and it was seen as exposing them to attacks. So even if such websites came up, they usually would be linked to a faculty member and a student, and when the faculty member or the student left, the collection would go offline, and that would be the end. Nevertheless, we persevered to the best of our ability. We probably more than doubled the amount of stuff we got from Eleazar Birnbaum. We found out that, in fact, the Oriental Institute, due to budgetary issues before the war, did not have a microfilm lab, but they had a photocopy machine. So we collected photocopies by essentially personally tracking down people who had done research in the Oriental Institute before the war. This is a very time-sensitive thing because when a scholar dies, usually the family will try to find a home for their books, but piles of photocopies in a language no one can read, they will throw out. So I think we have reached an era of diminishing returns on that. This is one of the 2 or 3 dozen books that survived the fire. in a memorial exhibition held at the Oriental Institute in Sarajevo just a few years ago. So what have we achieved? Number one is, as a colleague in Bosnia told me, a handful of photocopies and scans is better than a handful of ashes. So we gave them hope. We ensured that at least some tiny fragment of their destroyed collection survived. The second way we have done a service is that many of these manuscripts are unique. No other copies other than the photocopies survived. And our photocopies have already begun to be used in publications and scholarship. So here are two examples. One is an article by Tijana Krstic, and this is another article by Ashkan Koyuncu. So that too is a service to scholarship, however minor it might be. So will the destroyed manuscripts of Bosnia ever be reconstructed? The odds are they won't, but there are still things that could be done. There are copies of manuscripts that were published in local history journals that could be scanned and preserved either as transcripts or, if the illustration quality was good enough, as illustrations. But the concept is what's important. One of the casualties of the war was the beautiful old Ottoman bridge in Mostar, 30 meters high, built in 1556. In 1993, it was destroyed deliberately by a tank cannon firing at close range. Nevertheless, Bosnian architects rebuilt it in 2004. The will to preserve culture survives, and we hope that it will continue. Thank you very much. So here are some links that might be useful for some of you who want to explore this further. And of course, you're welcome to write to me. Thank you.
Greetings, everyone. My name is Walid Murad, and I am the Field Director for the Middle East, Africa, and Southern Asia.
Do you hear the voice?
Museum and Manuscript.
Are you getting the voice from my end?
I hear the voice.
Yes.
Why do I hear the voice? Yeah.
HMML is based at St. John University in Minnesota, and its main mission is saving the world's manuscript heritage from imminent danger, as well as making it available to researchers and scholars all over the world. HMML was founded in 1965 by Benedictine monks at St. John's Abbey to microfilm monastic manuscripts in Europe and a few years later in Ethiopia. 2003, HMML started its first digitization projects in the Middle East and India, mainly focusing on Christian libraries. However, in 2012, the work expanded to Islamic manuscripts collections in Jerusalem, Mali, India, Pakistan, and elsewhere in the world. In 2016, HMML launched VHMML, its online reading room. My colleagues would be shortly telling you more about VHMML. We use several ways to identify the libraries we partner with, sometimes from conferences or through our connections or mentioned as references in papers or publication, but I would say we mainly do it through viva voce or word of mouth. Manuscript collections that are inaccessible or threatened by conflicts and other dangers are our main priority. Iraq and Syria are good examples of the collections we electronically preserved before they were unfortunately lost. HMML provides the equipment, the studio installation, the training of local workers, usually identified by the owning institution, and of course, the technical and financial support of the digitization teams. 2 digital copies are produced. One remains with the owning institution, and the other goes to HMML, where it is checked for quality and errors, and eventually archived using the best backup technologies and techniques. Finally, the images are freely shared online with registered users. My colleagues will also be sharing the information on our in-house electronic cataloging of the collections digitized. Finally, I would like to take the opportunity to stress on 3 very important points in our work. When we establish a partnership with an institution, we sign an agreement in which the copyrights of printing, reproducing, or publishing of the manuscripts remain solely the property of the owning institution. We only ask for the right to online publish a low-resolution image on our website without even the possibility of downloading it. Second, we mainly digitize manuscripts. However, we always assist our partners in digitizing their archives, and in some cases, we leave them the equipment. Of course, this depends on the size of the library. Third, HMML mission doesn't stop at the digitization level or even at the cataloging and online sharing. HMML provides a long-term backup solution that is auto-financed. At any time, if the copy of the owning institution is damaged or lost, we always provide a replacement. And hence, although we appreciate and support other digitization projects, it is very important to safely back up the digitized material in a remote location. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Walid. Sorry about all the technical difficulties, but we're glad that you could all join us here today. As Matt mentioned, I'm Josh Mugler. I'm curator of Islamic manuscripts at Himmel. Walid told you a little bit about our history. We've been in operation for about 56 years now. Most of that time was spent microfilming. But for the last 18 years, we've been doing digital photography. So we do, most of our work, really all of our work in the Middle East has been since 2003, when we've also been doing digital photography. But we do have a considerable number of Islamic and Eastern Christian manuscripts in our old microfilm collections from places like the Austrian National Library, where we have a good amount of Ottoman Turkish and even at least one in Bosnian in Arabic script, just like Andras mentioned. As far as the cataloging work that takes place, once the manuscript images arrive to us from the repositories where they're held, we get to work on cataloging them. We have a great team of catalogers with various areas of expertise who put in all the metadata that on our site that makes the manuscripts searchable, makes them accessible. And that goes both for creating catalog records for the old microfilms that we have, as well as for the digitized manuscripts that are available to view in their entirety on the site. So at that point, there's usually not a whole lot of direct engagement with the library. We may use, their print catalogs as reference, although, we're always trying to sort of check and revise where necessary. The nature of our large collections means that it's very easy to compare other copies of the same text to see if it truly is the same, or if it's something similar that's been mistaken for the same text, that sort of thing. But usually once we finish the cataloging of a collection, we try and get in touch with that library again and kind of see what kind of publicity type of thing we can do to help make people aware that their collection is now available for viewing and is fully cataloged and that sort of thing. And this really, the relationships that we have at this point really vary depending on what library it is. Some of them are very much, cultivating a sort of online public presence, and others are much less accessible. But, you know, as an example, last year we finished cataloging the collection of the Howayda Library in Jerusalem. And they have an online presence of their own, and they also have a lot of connections. Members of the family are kind of well placed around the world, most notably Rashid Khalidi, who's at Columbia University. And so he's actually put together kind of, he and a team from Columbia and NYU have kind of put together a series of lectures called Readings in the Howayda that are based on scholars kind of talking about items found in the collections that we've digitized. And so that's been a great kind of ongoing partnership with them, and not only Rashid, but also the library staff in Jerusalem have been involved in that process. But then after that point, the most common way that we are in contact with those libraries, and Walid alluded to this, is over questions of use and publication ownership rights. As Walid said, the libraries retain control over the use of their images beyond just displaying them on our site. They're not available for download unless the owning library gives permission. And the same goes for publication if anyone's writing an article or something like that. So anytime someone requests that, we go to the owning library, you know, often through kind of an intermediary in that region, and we request permission, and if they grant it, then those images are made available to the person who wants to use or publish them. The details of that may vary depending on the individual agreement that we have with that library, but that's basically kind of how the process goes. So that's the way that, you know, through the cataloging process and then through the life of those images after they're cataloged, after they're all available on the site, those are the kind of connections and ongoing relationships that we have with those libraries. And, you know, our executive director, Columbus Stewart, is always, you know, staying in contact with the people there to kind of continue that relationship. So I'll turn it over at this point to Catherine Walsh, who will tell you a little bit more about some of the metadata and database work that we've been doing to help with this cataloging process.
Hello, thank you for having us at your meeting. I'm Catherine Walsh, and I suspect I'm one of the only people here who does not read or speak Arabic, but I bring to the table my expertise as a professional librarian. And one of our goals to provide access to these collections, which is, I think, particularly important because so many of our collections span geographical, cultural, and linguistic boundaries, is to bring sort of professionalizing library practices such as authority control and controlled vocabulary and international cataloging standards into play, both within our own catalog and within the data that we share elsewhere with other institutions. So basically, as has already been discussed, we establish these relationships with repositories. Many of them, Josh mentioned the Howayda Library, which is quite a professional endeavor, right? They have scholars working there, et cetera. Many of the libraries where we work do not have that kind of infrastructure. And so we basically help them to establish that infrastructure for their collections and share it with the Western world through the Library of Congress and also through the Virtual International Authority File. And I wanted to share very briefly a new project that we're doing, which includes a lot of the data that has come from the Jerusalem private library collections of Islamic manuscripts that Josh and his colleagues among the Islamic cataloging team at Himmel have recently finished cataloging. And hopefully, oh, I cannot share my screen, but hopefully we can get that set up. In the meantime, I will talk to you about what sort of instigated this project. So in January of 2020, we were awarded a grant from the National Endowment for the Humanities to help increase the cataloging presence and the infrastructure for cultures that often were underrepresented in the cataloging tradition of the West. And this includes lots of Eastern Christian cultures. This includes the, in large parts, the West African manuscript collections that we've been digitizing recently. We have hundreds of thousands of manuscripts from Mali and more coming in basically every month. So our West African catalogers will be busy for the next foreseeable future or their entire lives. But so we
sorry, Catherine.
Oh, yes, can I share?
Sorry, you can share your screen now.
Beautiful, thank you very much. All right, so let me share. All right, so this caused us to meet, we wanted to be able to apply controlled vocabulary to the authors, works, organizations, etc., within these traditions within our own system, and to share it with the world. So we developed this database, which around the Himmel Authority file, which came out of an internal database that our colleague David Calabro started for dealing with Eastern Christian materials, and it is designed to help professionalize and standardize author names, work titles, relationships between works and organizations. So for instance, while Andras was speaking his very compelling lecture about the Bosnian materials, we have some Bosnian materials that Josh has cataloged from the Austrian National Library. And I found, for instance, we have a record for Studies Gulistan. And we have within it, we have information about, what language it was in, when it was created, what type of literature it is, who has commented on it, including Paznavi Sudi, and what those commentaries are. So these are arising from our own collections. And these here you can see we have 4 commentaries on this work, which you can follow the path to them and learn a little bit more about this one, for instance. And then you can take this data and search within our own system and find, here are copies of this, one from Jerusalem and one from the Austrian National Library. So these systems are designed to increase discoverability, increase access, and we also work to bring the same level of interest to the collections where we're working. So here's an example of another Jerusalem collection of the Bukhari family, the Zawiya al-Uzbekiya, which is the Uzbek Cultural Center that has sort of arisen from this Bukhari family collection in Jerusalem, which we have established in the Library of Congress and in VIAF. And we've also linked it to sort of the people involved. And again, if you search for this within our reading room catalog, which is at vhimmel.org, you'll be able to find the collections. There are 181 records that come up when you search this. So the goal is to increase findability across collections and also to share our data. The Himmel Authority file allows you to download the data in other formats, and we also share it with the Library of Congress. This one has not yet made its way into there, but this one has. So here's a record that we created for the Library of Congress describing this library. And I believe we are out of time, but we would be happy to answer any questions at the end.
Thank you all so very much for that. And thank you for also bearing with us through the technical aspects of Zoom. So let me introduce our last speaker so we can have time for questions at the end. Our last speaker joins us from the Palestine Land Studies Center, or PLSC, at the American University of Beirut. And we originally had 2 colleagues, Professor Howayda Al-Harithy and Michael Avanzato. Professor Al-Harithy cannot join us, but Michael is here to give the presentation. We thank him very much. But just to introduce both, Dr. Al-Harithy is the founding director of the PLSC and professor of architecture and urban design at AUB. And Professor Al-Harithy's current research conceptualizes urban recovery in relation to processes of historical editing, trauma, and displacement. Michael's work, Michael Avanzato is the research coordinator at the PLSC. And Michael's work focuses on the intersection of land tenure law and British imperialism in mandatory Palestine. And today he will speak on the archives held by the PLSC, the challenges they present and the opportunities they offer to preserve Palestinian history and to advance the right of return for Palestinian refugees. And with that, I'll turn it over to Michael.
Thank you very much for that introduction. I'm just going to quickly share my screen here. This and play slideshow. Okay, you're all seeing this? Great. And apologies ahead of time if the power should cut or some other technical mishap befall us, given the situation in Beirut, which is also why Dr. Al-Harithy isn't here at the moment and sends her apologies. So as Matt said, I'll be talking about the Palestine Land Study Center at the American University of Beirut, going over a bit of the history of the center, how we came to be, the type of things that we're looking to do, and giving a brief overview of the type of material that can be found in our archive. So we'll start with the vision and mission of the Palestine Land Study Center, which is a very new effort. It was founded in September of 2019. And the goal here is primarily the preservation and documentation of Palestinian history. So you see here under vision, the PLSC is a catalyst for interdisciplinary research and a global hub for grassroots investigations and dialogues around the question of land and population studies in Palestine. The PLSC upholds and advances the inalienable rights of the Palestinian people, particularly the right of return, in accordance with international law and UN resolutions guiding the rights of Palestinian people to their land. And there's a bit more of a description down there in the mission, but I wanted to focus on the vision part a little bit, only because it's important to note that this is, of course, a political project, as any archive or research center or anything of this nature inevitably is. And it's critical to the work that we want to do here to maintain this tie of the right of return and the inalienable rights of the Palestinian people to Palestine. And so to that end, we've been working with Dr. Salman Abu Sitta, the Palestinian historian and geographer, and he donated his extensive personal archive to the Palestine Land Study Center. This is kind of the act of its founding. And our goal from here on outward is to take that archive, utilize it, make it accessible to people, and produce excellent research from it. So what we're doing now, well, we've actually been in the middle of our lecture series, and one of the lectures that was given was by Dr. Sadi Makdisi, called Tolerance is a Wasteland. And I think this is important to highlight in order to explain, again, our mission here, because in this talk, Dr. Makdisi said that there's a very specific form of denial at play in Palestine, in which the Palestinian presence in and the Palestinian claim to the land is not just simply denied or refused or covered up. It is covered up in such a way that the denial itself is denied. And this is a really key element to why any kind of archive surrounding Palestinian history and Palestinian culture, Palestinian land, is always endangered and under threat. Because in this talk, Dr. Makdisi was describing the so-called new Museum of Tolerance in Jerusalem, which, in order to be built, bulldozed over a 1,000-year-old Palestinian graveyard. And so you have this real physical danger and this real physical erasure of Palestinian history. And at the same time, many strains of academic erasure of Palestinian history. And so the purpose of this center is not only to provide these archives, but also to provide a narrative that can push back upon these greater claims. And now we'll come to Dr. Salman Abu Sitta and the Palestine Land Society. As I said, Dr. Salman Abu Sitta is the donor of the archives that form the core of the Palestine Land Studies Center. He's written innumerable books on Palestine, as well as created several atlases of Palestine. One of the most important being his Return Atlas, which shows not only that the right of return for Palestinian refugees, primarily those in Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, surrounding Palestine, not only is it a moral thing to allow this return and to advocate for it? But he really goes into detail on how logistically plausible it is. Creating demographic tables which reveal how you could have people return to their various home villages, how construction would work, and things of this nature. So there's a lot of material related to the right of return and to the advocacy for right of return in the Palestine Land Study Center's collection. And now getting to the actual collection part, here you can see just a brief description of the type of material that we have. Thousands of books on Palestine, dating both from the Ottoman Empire, the British Mandate, as well as hundreds of maps, thousands of aerial photos, volumes not only of British Mandate documents and district reports, but also land registries, which are obviously very important to historical studies of Palestine, and volumes specifically dedicated to the borders as well, and how they've evolved and shifted and changed over time. And obviously this is a lot of material to go over, but I'll give you just a brief couple of examples in the presentation here, so you can see, oh, went ahead too far. But so here we have some aerial photographs, and these are from, again, the collection by the Royal Air Force, the RAF. These were taken in British Palestine in 1946. This aerial survey on the left here, if you take a look at this map that has all these lines kind of going down, reveals the flight paths of many of the sorties that took the photographs which comprise our collection, or the British aspect of our collection. So you have, again, thousands of photographs at various angles in different parts of Palestine, different weather conditions, all taken just 2 years before the Nakba, or the catastrophe, the expulsion of the Palestinian people. And on the right here, you have the city of Haifa, just to give you an example of what some of these photos look like. And obviously this type of material is very useful to researchers because, as I mentioned, it's 2 years before the catastrophe and 2 years before the explosions and the violence. So if someone was trying to do a comparative study, this type of thing could be very useful. And then we actually have some even older photos, which I have been going through, taken in 1917 by the Prussian Air Force. And so this is a couple different photos of the Negev taken as part of the operations of the German-Turkish alliance. So these reveal a very complete picture of various parts of Palestine just at the end of the Ottoman Empire. So again, you can see here on the right that it does reveal a lot about the topography of the country, and again, would be very useful for someone looking to do any kind of looking forward type of comparative topography, either between the Ottomans and the British authorities, or between the modern status of things and the status of things priorly under the Ottoman rule. We also have a historic map collection, and this one, again, is just an example that I picked out. This was Pierre Jacotin's map of Gaza, and this map is from 1799 and is actually part of the first surveyed and triangulated map of Palestine that we know of. Pierre Jacotin was part of Napoleon's invasion of the country in 1799 before he was ultimately defeated at Acre. But in the course of doing this, he had several different mapping projects and surveying projects of Palestine. So this is one of the oldest examples that we have. And then finally, another part of the historical map collection, which shows some of the political implications and historical implications of this material, are two examples here from the British Mandate. If you look on the left, you can see this is kind of a map of the advancement of settlement and survey of the land of historic Palestine under the Mandate. But it also reveals, interestingly and importantly for historians, a bit of a degree of collusion between the cadasters, the surveyors, and the ultimate settlement of the country. So this, again, is just one of hundreds of maps in the PLSC's collection that can be referred to, but just to get a bit of a hint as to what there is there. And on the right, you have a British drawn depiction of the capture of Beersheba, which was the battle in 1917 between the Anzacs and the British on the one end and the Ottomans on the other. And the British have drawn up all their positions and shown how their battle went in their view. And there's similar maps related to General Allenby's entrance into Palestine and the beginning of the British Mandate. So there's a lot of interesting material, particularly from the British here. Okay, finally, I wanted to talk a bit about how our archive interacts with the Joffit Library here at AUB. The Joffit Library is the main library of the campus, the liberal arts library at least. There's also engineering libraries and a few others. But the folks at Joffit Library and the team there were very much indebted to them and grateful because they agreed to house some of the older and more delicate and more fragile pieces, anything that's requiring special levels of moisture or temperature controls or security or things like this can be found there. And also another huge thanks to them. They're currently in the process of cataloging all this material because some of this material still has not arrived yet to the center. We've brought in much of it from, as I said, Dr. Salman Abu Sitta, but we're still in the process of sorting through it and setting it up and getting it all ready for activation and presentation. And I just wanted to make sure that I had time to thank them for that. And that's all I have for you today. Thank you all very much for listening to my little talk here. And if you want to know anything else about the Palestine Land Studies Center, the website via AUB is there, but also probably easier just to Google Palestine Land Studies Center AUB. It'll come up. Thank you very much for your time. Now I'm gonna
Thank you so much, Michael, for the presentation, and thank you to all of our speakers for their presentations. So we do have a few minutes left over for questions, and I would like to first ask the other members of the Endangered Archives and Libraries Committee if they have any questions for us. And then we can move, if we have time, to audience questions.
Michael? I have a question for Michael Avanzato.
Please.
Yeah. Okay, first of all, thanks for bringing up something I forgot to bring up in my talk. People have asked me, why did the Bosnian Serbs make a manuscript library their target? Well, your talk reminded me that the Oriental Institute held the Ottoman Archives for Bosnia, which also had the cadastral records for the Ottoman period. So it was a question of who owns the land. If you're going to throw out people, if you're ethnically cleanse a territory, your biggest nightmare as an ethnic cleanser is that when the war is over, somebody shows up with a document in their hand and says, give it back because it's mine, it belonged to my great-grandfather. So it's very important to know that even 100-year-old, 200-year-old documents are intensely political. They have modern-day implications. So thank you for bringing that up. It's very important to know. The other thing that I wanted to ask is you mentioned the Prussian Air Force from 1917 taking aerial shots of Palestine. I'm not sure if it's the same one, but I'm aware of an archive of the Royal Bavarian Air Force from the same period. Their photographs are now in the War Museum in Munich, and they do cover Palestine, Syria, the whole territory of the Levant.
This is the archive, no?
Excuse me?
The Krieg archive, no?
Yeah, Kriegsarchiv. But they were the Bavarian Air Force, not the Prussians.
Okay, well, the ones that we have here appear to have been by the Prussians under Goring, that would later go on to be a rather famous war criminal and not seeing
Yeah.
positive stuff.
Yeah.
I think it's a separate set then.
Yeah. So you can ask Matt for my email. I can send you some details on that.
That'd be great.
The Bavarians had something known as the Kunstschutzkommando, the Monuments Protection Commando, and they particularly like to look at archaeological sites from the air.
Huh. Yeah, I would love to find out some more about that.
Yeah. So, and I also wanted to thank Catherine for bringing up an example that linked her presentation with mine. It shows how the world of manuscripts is tied together across geography, across libraries, and across time.
It's actually one of my favorite things about the work we do, when we'll be surprised when we find references from one collection in another, you know, or a text that was translated from Latin into Armenian, then translated from Armenian into Ottoman Turkish, and then into Syriac or something, you know, some odd transmission history that otherwise might become lost because names change, right, as translations happen. So it's really exciting to see the links and the traveling of the manuscripts.
Sharon has something for you.
Matt, Guy, do you want to put up the slides?
What's happening here?
Matt
Okay.
and Guy, if they will start their slides for me.
So thank you for coming. I figured when you said nor'easter.
Did you see it?
Yeah.
Okay, there's my slide, one of them. So Andras, the reason I'm here today,
Yeah.
I don't think everyone can hear me. The reason I'm here today is because you have meant so much to me and everyone else, and there are no words to describe what a great mentor and colleague and friend you were, but we're trying. Sharon and I had this idea for a long time. This is a festra.
Oh my God.
This is just a mock-up. Karen's going to say a few words.
Oh, damn. There's Gideon.
These are the authors. Matt, you can
I am
advance the slide.
so pleased.
And Karen, if you're there, can you
I'm
let Karen
here.
speak?
Hello?
I'm here.
Hi, Karen.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, good.
Turn the sound up.
No, this is
So,
fun.
well, I first
Thank
met
you so
Andras.
much.
Karen's going to say something. We did it together.
I first met Andras as a graduate student, although I'm sure he doesn't remember that. But I really got to know Andras and appreciate the breadth and depth of his encyclopedic knowledge, as you've just seen demonstrated, and his unique sense of humor. While I was editing Mukarnas for many years as the managing editor, Andras became the Mukarnas Mufti because he issues fatwas on all the rules about transliterations and all the other strange matters that can come up in only a Mukarnas article that somehow the Chicago Manual of Style never seems to cover. And all of this while sitting in the basement of the Fine Arts Library, the old Fine Arts Library, or the in Litauer. Many authors who graced the pages of Mukarnas have no idea what it meant to have the Mukarnas Mufti correct the oddities of their citations and just cast his eye over their articles and sometimes save them from themselves. Andras seems to know every language that was ever spoken in the Ottoman Empire, even those he claims not to know. And just this summer, when I was confronted with a strange Arabic transliteration of what seemed to be a Greek term, he all of a sudden came up with Serbian and Bosnian etymologies for this term. Andras just knows everything and represents to me the best of what Harvard has to offer. Someone so learned and so willing to share everything he knows. So now, after all the articles that Andras helped to improve, Sharon and I hope to present him with this volume in his honor, entitled The Book of Riedlmayer, Wondrous Deeds and Glorious Works from Budapest to Cambridge, and Cats. Lots of cats. So now, the one thing that I've been wondering while we've been planning all of this for all of these months is how we could possibly pull it off without consulting the one person from whom it was meant to be kept secret.
We need your help.
So now the cat is out of the bag, as it were, and we're probably going to be consulting you a lot, Andras, on doodads and the technical term for all the transliterations we've corrected over the years.
Your own best rest.
And everything else. You will probably have the distinction of being the only person to have to work on your own festschrift, Andras. So now I'm just going to read to you the names of the people who are contributing, and I feel they don't cover all aspects of your intellectual breadth, but I think they touch on some of them. Ottomanists, Islamic art historians, cultural preservationists, and of course, librarians, and more than a few cat lovers. So there's Fauzi Abdulrazak, Asra Akshamia, Judith Bing and J. Brooke Harrington, Guy Barak, Amila Buturovich, Geza David, Roberta Doherty, Christian Hedrick, Nedret Ishli, Jamal Kafadar, Dariusz Kołodziejczyk, William Kopicki. So, I'll let you correct it.
Kołodziejczyk, it's a Polish name.
William Kopicki, myself, Victor Ostapchuk and Caroline Finkel, Nasser Rabat, David Roxborough, Yasmin Al-Saleh, Irvin Schick, Sharon, and Sean Swanek. And many more people who will be congratulating you in the Tabula Gratulatoria. So thank you, Andras.
Well, thank you, Karen, and thank you, Sharon. For once, I'm left speechless in many languages. And it's been an honor and a pleasure knowing you and working with you, and I miss you all. Retirement in some ways is a mixed blessing, but as you can see, one can stay active.
Definitely.
Editing your own festschrift, of course.
Yeah.
And for short, we're calling it the Andras Name.
Yeah.
Because the title's very long.
So this is wonderful, and
Yeah.
you know, the logistics were amazing.
I was hoping
Sharon was standing in the room next to you.
You were
for
asking
about 10
questions?
minutes while you were absorbed.
I was focused.
You were. And I think a lot of the authors are actually saying that. I think Yasmin is here. And
I saw her log on.
yeah, that's why. Yeah, they're here.
Julia's
I
there.
am deeply touched. Thank you very
I
much.
think Julia Bailey's there.
Yeah, who was also a Makarnas editor.
Yeah. Does anyone, can we open the floor to the audience if you want to say anything to Andras? Sorry to cut your panel short. Amanda.
So,
I don't know. Oh, yeah, and the side. Hey,
So-
Sharon. Now you're big.
Hey.
Oh, you look great. All the way from California.
yeah.
Yeah. So,
Now, I mean, there's a lot to be said for Zoom meetings. It involves no hours in the air and the airports and strange hotels.
no, but I
Or
still
viruses.
get back out of hell.
Yeah.
We really,
Waleed, did you have your hand raised?
No, no. I'm
No,
fine.
okay.
we know that this is, we could never express our gratitude to you fully, Andras. So
Yeah.
this is something you very much deserve, and Karen and I are very pleased.
Well, I'm very grateful to the two of you for organizing this, and to all the people who contributed. Thank you.
Okay. You guys still talking?
And what an appropriate occasion to present it at.
That's what we thought. This was great. That's one of the reasons. Oh, Irvin's here. Let Irvin in.
Yeah. I can let him in.
Oh, wow, look at
I'm
you.
authorized.
Privileges. Hi, Irvin. Wherever you are.
He's logging in, probably.
Okay. Oh, he's the one who gave us this image, by the way.
Hi, Andras. It's good to see you. Victor
Hi,
here.
Victor.
You and one of your other epistasis in your life is a MELA librarian. Amazing to see all this.
Yeah. Well, thank you for coming and thank you for contributing.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Thank you, Victor.
So,
I'm sorry, I interrupted your question.
no, it's fine.
Okay. I'll go back to it.
It's the kind of surprise I like,
Okay.
as opposed to learning that, your credit card bill is overdue.
It was very nerve-wracking planning all of this, the logistics of it.
We were so afraid someone would flip out and tell you about it because there's so many people involved. There's actually 40 people. So.
Well, old Arabic saying, "Fi hifz al-lisan, salamatun al-insan." In guarding your tongue is the salvation of mankind.
Exactly. Well, thank you. Thank you, everyone, for letting me cut in on your panel. I mean, it's actually our panel.
Yeah.
And I will watch it in the recording since I didn't get to actually see it.
Oh, this kitty is terrible.
Oh,
yeah, Gideon has to come in.
Gideon
has to come in.
He's terrified. Since Sharon came in, he thought it might be the cleaners or some scary people.
Here you go, Kitty.
Oh, Brett.
But he's restless.
He was hiding under the sofa.
Okay, let him go. Let him go.
Oh,
A cameo.
And thank you, Carol, for putting up with all of us calling and asking for help.
So, did you know?
Of course.
Yes. She was in that all the time.
I was going to pretend to sneak out to Portuguese, leave openly for Portuguese class, and then I realized I didn't have to. You didn't notice me.
Well, I was focused.
Okay, Gideon.
Yeah, he's a curious cat.
So, does anybody have any questions?
Invited. So, but you crashed the party.
Yay, Julia.
Crashed the party.
Oh, that's a sweet cat. Look at you. Oh. Hi, Julia.
So, what's the cat called?
Can't hear you.
No.
Julia, you're muted.
You're muted, Julia.
That cat is called Dash.
There you go.
That cat is called Dash.
Ah.
So, how are you?
I'm fine. I see Irwin
How are
has
you
a.
enjoying?
I'm fine. I see Irwin has a.
Everyone has a cat.
Of course.
Of course, Karen has two cats.
They're camera shy. They're camera shy.
I know.
Oh dear.
Return it to the gallery.
This is
Can you-
phone is useless.
There you go.
I think it's computer.
Did it work?
That's coming.
Okay. Oh, there's me.
There's Victor.
Yeah. Hi, Aaron.
This is wonderful. Thank you all so much for putting up with us and our planning. Irvin, thank you for the cover.
Oh, wow.
And the
Very nice.
I think this is from you, Irvin.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Very nice.
Yeah, thank you.
So,
Pedro, you have me.
Is everybody having trouble with network? Or just me?
Is everybody having trouble with network?
Yeah.
Or just me?
no, lots of people are, there are people tuning in from Lebanon who are having power failures and connection failures. So compared to that,
Does anyone else want to say something? I grew up right here. You're muted.
You can also mute and unmute there.
You
can also mute and unmute there.
so thank you for joining us.
It says it wants me to unmute.
No, he wants
As long as
It says it wants me to unmute.
No, I didn't hear you drop by.
Yeah.
Hey, Yasmin.
Hi, thank you so much.
You too.
Hi, thank you so much.
Oh, you muted.
Try again, I'm muting.
Yasmin, you're muted.
I'm having audio issues as well. Thank you so much for
I'm having
including me.
audio issues as well. Thank you so much for including me.
And
Well, thank you
I
for
mean, I
joining us.
couldn't have written the dissertation
Ever
without
since you
András'
started,
guidance.
we've
I
missed you.
couldn't have written the dissertation without András' guidance.
So many people could not have written a dissertation without András' guidance. I understand that. Me too.
As I've said before,
Wow.
Andras has been a secret hodger. Andras has been a secret hodger for many of us.
Andras has been a
So it's a
secret
pleasure
hodger for many of us.
to pay back.
But it's a pleasure to pay back.
Yeah, well, as those of us who are librarians know, librarianship is one of the helping professions, and I was glad to be able to share in the adventures of so many of you as you did research, as you wrote papers, books, and dissertations. And I consider that a major achievement of my career to be able to help you with that.
And that's only about half of what you've done.
Articles, papers.
And that's only about half of what you've done.
Exactly. Yeah. Deserves so much more.
You can see who else is in by clicking on that little arrow at the end. See who's in.
Well, Sharon, what about that? You have Sharon.
This is Lily.
This is Lily.
Lily.
Sure.
If you extend the figure.
That's just a fix. She's not. That's not a live picture. It's just a fix. She's not. It's not live.
Well,
So if no one has further questions or comments, I think
many of you will be hearing from Sharon and I later. Thank you all. Thank you all for participating. Thank you for the panel that I haven't seen yet, but I will. And thank you for contributing. to this work that does not even capture Andras, does not even capture this.
Yes, thank you again very much to all of our speakers.
Yes, thank you again very much to all of our speakers.
And for everyone for coming.
Sorry, I cut into your program.
And for everyone for coming.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you.
What's it? Was there a speech or something?
I said, you can talk to people or you can do that.
Kitchen somewhere.
That's a nice space.
And it is. And so the article, the abstract of it, the article,
Please don't look too closely. I already saw some mistakes.
Please don't look too closely. I already saw some mistakes.
I'm really touched to see this many people contributing. I know what it takes to write an article, even if you've written many before.
I honestly, Andras, more people would have contributed. We had to start at some point.
Yeah.
Everyone is, everyone just knows how much you contribute. Not just the dissertations, to all the work. And your own.
I like this title. The Basha and his librarian.
Oh, yeah. Guy.
Yeah.
Thank you, Guy. You're still there.
Wow.
Now,
This is great.
this is more than, I mean, more than if you deserve to look more. This is truly, you can do it on you have so many scholars in this world that are careers to you, including me.
One of the joys of being a librarian is actually sharing the virtual field of discovery.
Mm-hmm.
And in some ways, it's actually a bit mean because I get to share in the adventure of discovery and research, and then we get to do hard work.
That's true.
Or writing it up.
Actually, research is fun. It's writing it. And then some people actually do words of that too. And this is the other side because you know.
Chat button. Click on that. You'll see what people are writing about. Click on that. You'll see what people are writing.
Wow.
Look, everyone misses you, respects you, loves you, adores you, because you never left. You'll never be their friend. And now they say people are out of the place.
Something.
Wow. Yeah. Anyway, thank you all for making my career fun. But amazing research and finding all these people.
Oh, yes. Yeah. You think you can find it? I can't remember if it's the the computer fell on.
Yeah, I know. You discovered her too.
Thank you.
Anyway, thank you.
Thank you.
I'm not sure whether I can let him
Oh,
know.
maybe everyone's going off the room now for the conference.
All right.
I can't believe we actually did it.
We actually did it.
No, I can't either. Sharon and I were so stressed about planning. So we're very glad.
I'm so glad you did.
Yeah. Well, this is amazing. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for reading the book for me.
So how long do I won't have? So anyway, it's quite a technical feat for anyone to understand.
Very nice. You can ask Darius and Dave. We've been planning for a long time. Right, Karen? I mean, they're probably sick of hearing us. Darius and Dave.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Not too bad.
Actually, the book of Riedlmayer was Dave's idea.
Actually, the book of Riedlmayer was Dave's idea.
That is Dave's idea. The book of Riedlmayer. And the Andras Riedelmeier is, I think, Jamal. Jamal, yeah. Thank you.
Well, say hi to Carol from me and Gideon.
Thank you very much.
Good to see you all.
Well, say hi to Carol from me and Gideon.
Carol's right here.
I'm right here. Thank you so much for all your amazing efforts. Inspiring.
Yeah.
All right.
All right.
We had a good time doing it. Really fun.
That's the important part.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You have a good day, Andras. And we'll probably have to talk more about Hungarian
Good day,
soon.
Andras.
Thank
We'll
you.
probably have to talk more about Hungarian soon.
Oh, thank you.
Okay, yeah, welcome. Not today. Not today.
So.
Bye, Karen.
Bye.
For everything. I'll talk to you later.
Okie doke.
Bye.
Have a good
Bye.
visit. I'm jealous. I wish I were there with you.
Have a good visit. I'm jealous. I wish I were there with you.
I know, I wish you were too. Although it is a nor'easter, I'm not kidding. It's really bad up north. Right?
I was woken up in the night by the sound of raindrops banging against the window.
They're banging on my dresser. Yeah, they're well, several. Yeah. Oh, some of them. It's very windy. Oh my God. Okay, because we're so close to the ocean.
Well, you're close to the shore, yeah.
Yeah, we're like on the inland, and like sweet spot.
I'm going to go feed my kitties.
And then, yeah, so,
I'm gonna go feed my kitties.
Okay. I'm sure they all appreciate it.
yes.
I just gave food and Gideon some compensation.
Yeah. So, so, no, this is the biggest format. Urban provided, he owns this thing, provided it, copyright, and it will be, there's a, and we'll have the movie, and all this, and then it goes to school. The article's actually out of now, which is really good.
Anyway,
We expect to publish it in the spring.
so who's your publisher?
Well, we're negotiating with several, one lucky girl.
Wow.
Yeah, yeah. Well, look at that kind of law, right? So,
Yeah.
and then there's an academic trust that Hakon's involved with now. And so, and he's Hakon knows that actually working this year.
Yeah.
It's serious, I think.
I saw that.
Yeah. And so
So it's polyglot. Congratulations in Hungarian, Turkish.
Arabic, and
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
it's not like you said, all you know, but
Anyway, it's a very nice thing to have for sort of a para-academic career.
you had an academic career, you're a scholar.
Yeah, well, I actually got very lucky. Back when I almost finished my PhD, which I never did, I was interviewing for these dead-end service jobs at the state universities.
Oh, yeah.
And no future. And then I just looked into this one.
Well, first you took some library courses.
That helped.
I got a job at Simmons,
Oh.
a fill-in year job. I was just there 1 year, but spouses had the ability to take one course at a time for free. And he took it at the library school because he'd sort of been thinking about it. A friend of his was working at the University of Chicago Library.
Yeah.
And so he took two courses at least before
Three.
he interviewed. I know you took 3, but
Yeah.
didn't you interview that spring or something?
In June.
In June, yeah.
And then it was kind of an iffy situation because it was beginning of the summer. And because it was a com program, Grabar had to approve. And Grabar was away for the summer. So I interviewed in June and then got no reply. By midsummer, I was really restless and I asked personnel, well, there are these other openings at business school library, etc. I need some income. And they said, hold on, I think this job is good for you. And so my start date was November 1st.
Oh.
Did you actually interview
Hey,
it?
everybody. Hi. I'm really sorry, but we're going to have to end this meeting because the next one's going to start in 10 minutes. And
Oh, sorry.
Sorry, Justin. Sorry.
We thought it was
no problem. It was a wonderful conversation. Thank you so much.
You can probably edit out
Wonderful
bits.
Thank you so much, but we got to sign off.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye.